Hi again. We're talking about another topic, and this one is a big one. Business correspondence, which talks about the way that businesses communicate and correspond mostly in written format. So we're going to go through that topic. If you recall, there are multiple ways to communicate, one of them being written communication, which involves things like letters and memos and reports and things like that. And so in this topic itself, we cover things like the business letter, we cover things like memos, and we start off by talking about how they should be written. And then we go into the specifics, which are the formats of each of them. So let's get started. Of course, welcome to the virtual space. Let's work together to learn, share ideas, participate, and learn something new. The wise always seek knowledge. So, types of business correspondence. Types of written documents that are normally found within a business environment are going to be your letters and your envelopes. These are documents that we usually use to communicate to persons externally, meaning not individuals that work for your company. We normally do that in the form of memorandums or memos, for short. But letters and envelopes are what we normally send out to our external customers, which are going to be your customers, also going to be persons like your vendors and people that you buy things from. That's who vendors are. Any government agencies that you have to report information to. Normally, you would send a letter and not a memo. When we talk about memorandums, these are documents used to communicate internally. So you're going to be communicating to persons like your other employees, your co-workers, your boss, maybe somebody below you. You might send out a memo to communicate with them. We also have emails, which of course can go both ways, internally and externally, because I can send an email to my colleague or I can send an email out to a vendor. But of course, when I'm sending an email out externally, I'm definitely going to be a whole lot more professional, because you should have a different, you should have respect no matter which direction you're sending it to, but you should be a little bit more professional, or try to be a whole lot more professional when communicating externally. Of course, like I said, we have reports and things like tables to show information, graphs, and presentations. All are forms of business communication. And what's worth mentioning is that each of these usually have a specific format that must be remembered to make sure that the document looks formal and it looks appropriate and it looks professional. Now, with the reports and the tables and tables, graphs, and presentations, they are not as strictly followed because they can vary based on creativity, but letters and envelopes, memorandums, and emails should all have a certain format that we're going to discuss today. Let's start off by the messages that are sent on these written documents. And so there are 4 main types of messages that can be sent via correspondence. You're going to have a good news correspondence. We give them positive vibes. We have a neutral, meh type of message. We also have a negative message. It's like, ooh, no. Most times we're telling somebody no. And then we have a message that's considered to be persuasive. We're trying to get somebody to do something. And so let's talk about how our textbook suggests that we approach each of these. When we have a positive message that we're trying to send, positive vibes, what we want to do is we want to try and be direct. We don't want to waste too much time fluffing around, playing around in the bush. We ain't doing none of that stuff. We getting straight to the point. We being direct. We be very specific as well. Say what we have to say, get it out there and get it done. And then you be complete. You give us much information as possible. Because if you recall, there are 5 C's to effective communication. We have correct, complete, courteous, concise, and correct, complete, courteous, concise, and I'm not remembering the other one. It'll come to me. But there are 5 C's. And so we want to make sure that we are applying those 5 C's to all of the messages that we send, we're writing things that are meeting those objectives. And so we have to be complete as well when you're sending a positive message. Other types of message, when we're being direct, when we're sending a neutral message, we have to be direct. We have to get to the point as well, be very specific and be complete as well. So the same way we approach a positive message, we would approach a neutral message, meaning that there's no good news and there's no bad news. We're just passing information on, like maybe just saying that we're expanding or something like that, you know, something straightforward. Negative messages, however, need to be slightly different. We need to be indirect by not just slamming it in the person's face. Hey, I don't want to work with you anymore. You suck. No, we don't want to do that. We want to try to be as indirect as possible by smoothing it off a little bit. You know, I loved working with you, and I think you have a great positive attitude, and then get to the bad news. You want to be indirect. What I like to say is do a little sandwich. When we think of an Oreo, 2 cookies at the top, and there's that white goodness in the middle there. The 2 cookies at the top represent a strong finish and a strong start. And we start off with something positive, let's end with something positive. And somewhere in the middle there, we want to throw in the bad news, because we want to make sure that it's clear, that the person understands what the bad news is. And so that for that reason, we try to give as much detail as possible, just to may help the person to understand what's happening. And then, like it says, try to make it better, or try to find a suggestion, or say something in the end. Let's say you're firing somebody. Like I say, you start off talking about them and their good work ethics. You say that, hey, we can no longer renew your contract. But then at the end, you could say, if, however, you need a recommendation, I will gladly give you a recommendation. That's going to be much better to take than just saying, hey, guess what? You're fired. We don't want to work with you anymore. And so that's a negative message. And then we have a persuasive message, which is just the goal of a persuasive message is to persuade someone, to get them to do something, to get them to buy something, to get them to partake or donate to something. And so what you want to do is you want to do your best to get the reader's attention, and you want to help them to be interested in what you're interested in or what you're trying to sell to them. Okay, and so these are your types of messages that different types of messages, and the approach you should take. Positive and neutral, just be direct, just get to the point, give as much information as possible, and be very specific. Negative message, don't get to the point. Try the sandwich approach, try the Oreo approach, and start off good, put that message in there, put the information in there, say why, and then try to offer a suggestion or make the person feel better or offer some positive feedback at the end. And then, of course, persuasive, get that reader's attention, because you can't persuade me to buy anything without getting my attention. And so that's first and foremost. And then make sure you stimulate their interest as well. All right, and so just because I know it was on the next slide, but let's talk about the 5 C's of effective communication. We're going to talk about this again. Comes up almost every time. I've never seen it missed in a BGCSE past paper, so this is very common. 5 C's of effective communication: being clear, complete, courteous, correct, and concise. Being clear, meaning that you're sharing information in a way that's easy to understand. Being complete, meaning that you're giving all of the information. So if you're communicating a meeting or a party or something like that, you're going to want to say, not just say when it is, but you need to also say where it is, because that lets the person know what they need to do. Where is it? What time is it? What time is expected to end? How do we dress? You would be as complete and include as much information as possible that's necessary for the reader. Courteous, of course, is communicating in a way that's nice and respectful and makes the person feel good as much as possible. Being correct, giving correct information, not lying or telling false information. And then being concise, sharing the information, sharing your message without a lot of run-ons and doing a lot of extra things, saying a lot of extra words that don't need to be said. When it comes to your writing, all of those are, the 5 C's are pretty important, but what is also suggested is you also want to make sure that you're improving in your writing. You want to have good writing in business because, of course, it's a reflection on your company, the way that you write and the way that you share information. And so it's always suggested, number one is to anticipate the reader's response. Think about what you're trying to say, what a reader would ask, and try to answer it in your writing. So just like the example with the party, if I'm inviting someone to a party, I'm not going to just say, well, where is it? And the time and the date. Maybe somebody might think to ask, well, how do I dress for this party? Is this a formal party? Is it a casual party? You can put that information in there because you think that a lot of persons or that be a question persons may have. And so that makes your writing so much better because it answers questions even before you get the question. And that's always good in business writing. Second, we're going to reiterate just that good news message again. State it, give the details, and explain, then close courteously. Bad news, you're going to give the information, give the reason for the bad news, try and make the readers feel good. Use the indirect approach, begin with a neutral statement, nothing negative, and close on a positive note and make any suggestions. Those are the tips related to improving your writing when you have to give bad news, because it's evident you'll have to at some point in an office career. And 4, improving writing you can use tools like form letters and boilerplates, which help companies to save time. And it's normally it's a piece of writing that has been sketched out or has been written out to be reused over and over again. So think about those email addresses that you get. Every time you sign up for a new website, a new clothing website, you are a new subscriber. Thanks for being a new subscriber. I'm so glad you decided to subscribe to Fashion Nova. And we look forward for you to being our company. Here's a complimentary 25% off. There is no one sitting down typing that every time. It's a pre-written message that's used and it just slips in your name, your email address, and whatever information it needs to add based on what your subscription. And so those are email forms, but they also have those in letter form as well. And they call those form letters, where you pretty much just take the information, the name of the individual, and maybe the period of time that they subscribe for, or, whatever the message is, and you slot it into the space in Microsoft Word. You put the names in there. Microsoft Word just like that takes your mailing list and inserts it into each letter and creates a new letter, and you can just print those letters out and send those. You don't have to worry about the wording of the letter because it's something that happens all the time and happens regularly, that you write the same old letter for all the time. That's a form letter. When we think of a boilerplate, these are going to be standard writings that companies use for different things. So if you look at a company's website, if you look at a company's brochure, if you listen to one of the executives of a company and maybe they're being introduced, oftentimes it's the same wording. And so it prevents you having to think of a new write-up or new wording to describe your company, because it's a part that's standard and that can be used in just about any written document that's describing the company itself. So it's really helpful to allow you to write better and not have to think about what's being written, but just copy and paste in key information that's already been approved and written for you in whatever piece of writing you want to add it to. So it's very helpful in that regard. Next, we're going to talk about proofreader's marks. And proofreader's marks is key to business correspondence, in that with any business correspondence or any business document that's being typed, normally there's what we call a first draft or a rough draft that's done, a first draft and a final draft. In a rough draft, what happens is the person that's writing is just throwing out their ideas. They're putting together the first copy of the document that they're preparing, whether it be a letter, a memo, or a report or anything. They prepare a rough draft and they normally go through it and identify anything that needs to be changed, anything that needs to be corrected. And this is a part of the editing process. And oftentimes what happens is they use things like proofreaders marks to help communicate any corrections that need to be made on a document. So let's say a secretary typed a document on behalf of their boss. The document that's typed, normally they would do a rough draft, and then she would look through and make any corrections he or she identified, and that's considered to be the first draft. The first draft is given to the boss or somebody else to take a look at to identify if there are any errors in terms of spelling or grammar or content that need to be corrected before the draft is finalized, and there's the final document, which is the completed document. And so to communicate any corrections that need to be made, normally we use proofreaders marks. And so here's an example of very common proofreaders marks that are used in documents, what they mean and how they're actually used. So the first one being capitalized. When we talk about capitalizing, we're going to put 3 lines underneath the letter that needs to be capitalized. And so as you see, they have 3 lines underneath lake, the L for lake, and T for Tahoe. Why? Because Lake Tahoe is an actual subject. And so therefore it's not a subject, it's a noun. And so therefore, when we describe a place, which is a noun, we normally put capital letters in the front. And so therefore, this is correcting this particular error. This one here, when you see a slash, or sometimes it says LC, that means to make it lowercase. So when you see a slash on a letter, oftentimes it means that we should be putting small s and a small b, because these are nouns and there's no reason for them to be capitalized. SP normally means that there's a spelling mistake, and they normally put it right around. Sometimes they circle it as well, but I put it in the area of the letter or the word that needs to be checked for spelling. So whenever you see SP, that normally means that there's a spelling mistake. Cloudy doesn't have a W, it has a U. When we see a dot and a circle, normally that says to add a period, and you find that at the end of a sentence, they're just telling you, hey, you forgot to put a period here, and so add that period. Whenever we see this squiggly line here, this is telling us to delete or remove something. And so there are 2 ways that can be done. In this instance, the line itself covers the entire word. So that's telling me to take out this entire word. However, if this was only through the W, if it went up and just only covered or crossed through the W, then that was telling me to remove the W by itself. Whenever you see this arrow here, this is asking us to insert or add something. In this case, it could be a word, it could be a letter, it could be a punctuation. And so we're going to see the insert in between where they want you to add the word or the letter. And so 6 pups would be added, were in the letter. So if you had to rewrite it, you would write 6 pups were in the letter. This one here is similar, the insert sign again, but this time it has a comma on the inside. And so this is telling us we have to insert commas in between the spaces where the arrow is pointing. This here, we call this transpose. And so with the transpose, what it's telling us to do is there's 2 things that are out of order. And so if we read it, an otter swam in the bed kelp. It should say kelp bed. And so what happens is the curves engulf what they want you to switch. So in this instance, it's 2 words. Sometimes it can be a word or it can be a letter, 2 letters. And what you will see is the only thing in between is going to be a letter instead of the words. And so it's just telling you to switch the order of those words or switch the order of those letters. When we have the insert that's upside down with an apostrophe, think of an apostrophe is up in the air. That's telling us to add an apostrophe wherever the insert arrow is going. So an apostrophe in between D and S. Here we have the same insert again, but this time we have quotation marks on the inside. And that's just telling us to insert quotation marks. When we see this hashtag or this number sign, what that tells us is we're going to make a space. So add a space in between two words that are most likely typed or put together and shouldn't be. When we see these two brackets on top of each other, that normally tells us that there's a space that needs to be closed. So this one is telling you to add the space. This one is telling you to remove the space by closing it up. And so her favorite game is softball, not soft ball, but softball, one word. And then the final one, sorry about that. The final one normally looks like a P, a backwards P with a double line. That's a paragraph symbol. And so that tells us to begin a new paragraph. So instead of we had fun, next we went to, we're actually going to make this a new paragraph and not put these on the same line. And we're going to make that correction. So definitely throughout your BGCSE, you're going to see some of these. Sometimes they give you an entire passage and ask you to rewrite it, correcting the proofreader's marks. Other times they give you a proofreader's mark and ask you to define what it is, or they give you a definition and ask you to draw the proofreading marks. So this is definitely something you want to be familiar with. All right, so we've talked a lot about what goes into proper writing and getting your writing from first draft to final draft. So now let's talk about correspondence. These supplies, these are things needed to make, to help with the writing process and preparing these correspondence. Of course, you're going to need paper, because if you're preparing a letter or a report or something, you're going to need a piece of paper to put it on. You're going to need things like correction inks, so correction pens, whiteout, to help you with making any corrections. Envelopes usually are needed, especially when you're putting together letters, but also these type of envelopes are just, they have to hold documents as well. Pens, definitely for writing. Sometimes you need a computer and inks and things like that as well too. We have a letterhead, which is just going to be the company's name at the top of a document, the company name, the company's logo, maybe their contact information, the P.O. box, the address, and sometimes the email address or the company website, that information normally at the top of a page. And then sometimes there are other things like carbon papers, which are those papers that when you write on the top, they have a black sheet in the back of it that transfer information to the copy in the back of it. So those are pretty, they're pretty convenient because they avoid you having to write certain documents over more than once. It does it for you the first time. And so those are some correspondence supplies that are pretty convenient when preparing correspondence in business. What I want to point out is there are some factors to be considered as well when we're looking at paper. Paper can be very cheap and it can be very costly. And so some factors that affect the quality of paper are going to be the content. So what the paper is actually made of. Is it made of cheap wood or, you know, I don't know, cotton, cloth? Depending on what it's made of, it's going to be more expensive. Think about the paper, tracing paper versus painting paper. Painting paper tends to be much thicker as well, and it's heavier than tracing paper, it's lighter. And so the weight of paper itself can affect the cost. The heavier the paper is, the more quality it's expected to have, and therefore it costs a bit more. When we talk about size, some papers are the usual letter or legal size paper, but there are some papers that are huge. They're really big because what they do is they print a large amount of things. And so those papers are going to be much more costly than a regular size paper or a small size paper. When we talk about finish, some paper is coated, some paper is matte, some paper is clear fronted. And when you have those different types of paper, types of ways that paper can be bought, that affects the price as well. A shinier paper is more costly and harder paper is more costly as well. And so that affects the cost. That's the finish of the paper. The type of paper depends on things as well too, whether it's a matte paper or it's just a regular white paper, or sometimes we call bond paper, which is slightly different and considered to be more professional. Because of the type of paper, it can cause an excess amount as well. And then colors. Your standard white paper is going to be cheaper than colored paper because there's additional cost in making that paper different colors. And so colors is also going to affect the quality or price of paper itself. Here's an example of a form letter that I talked about earlier. This form letter, as you can see, this area here is an area that is just replaced with, it can be replaced with whatever the company's name is. It can be replaced with whatever the current date is, the customer name, but it's already written out for you. It's already written out for whomever is preparing this letter. You just have to pretty much slip in who it's for and who's the name of the company, put a letterhead at the top maybe, and it's good to go. So they're really just templates that are used to make the writing process easier when you're writing the same wording over and over again. Next, we're going to talk about something that's really big, very important, business letters. And I've seen countless questions about business letters. And so you want to be familiar with business letters and how they should be set up, the standard format of them. And so as a summary, we should know that business letters have 3 styles: modified block, AMS style, which is a simplified style, and block style. And so no matter what happens, you have to remember these 3 styles of letters, and you have to be able to distinguish them. Let me talk about the business letters themselves. We have basic parts, or parts that are part of every single business letter, the only exception being AMS style. It would be the heading or the letterhead, the date that the letter is written, the inside address, which is the address of the person receiving the letter, the salutation, which is the greeting, that they're Miss Jones or they're Mr. Jones. Normally we put one name, we don't put first and last name. We have the body of the letter, which is the content. We have the complimentary close, which is the closing saying thank you or best regards or sincerely. Then we have the signature line, which consists of the signature of the person writing the letter, the name of the person writing the letter, and their title or position. Those parts are basically on every single letter, with the exception of the AMS style letter. The AMS style letter, because it's simplified, it doesn't include a salutation and it doesn't include a complimentary close, but it includes every other part. Okay. Optional parts that go on your letter, depending on the circumstances behind it, may be your typist or reference initials, which are the initials of the person that typed the letter on your behalf, on behalf of the person that wrote the actual letter. We have a copy notation, which is just a note that says, hey, somebody else is going to get a copy of this letter. It's normally at the bottom of a letter. We have a mailing notation, which oftentimes is at the top and gives information about how this mail is to be treated. Is it supposed to be special? Is it supposed to be, what is it? First class, second class, third class, fourth class, all of those. Should it be, it'll tell you what type of letter it is or how the letter was sent. Usually at the top of a letter, the attention line, normally when you try to draw attention to a particular position, maybe you don't know exactly who's the customer service manager. And so you're going to put attention customer service manager instead of the name at the top of the inside address. Then there's a subject line. If you want to give a subject to the letter, if overall you're talking about new product, then maybe you can put underneath the dear sir or ma'am or dear whomever, you put subject or you put subject, and then in all caps you want to put, new product or something, just to give the reader an idea of what the body is about before reading it. And then a postscript is another example. It's just one of those documents or one of those parts that, if you think of PS normally goes at the bottom of a letter. And so postscript, you would normally put a little note at the bottom of the letter. You don't have to put the PS, you just put note that, such and such, or et cetera, et cetera. You put whatever information you need to add at the end of the letter. And so just so you know, when it comes to the format of business letters, normally they are 2 inches at the top, or you skip 6 lines, and then you put a double space in between most parts of those letters, move between paragraphs, except that there's a quadruple space, or you leave 3 spaces in between the date and a complimentary close. Like I said, in the AMS style letter, everything is, all of the basic parts are there except salutation and complimentary close. And what happens is you also add a subject to your AMS style letter as well. When we have letters that have more than 1 page, the second page of the letter normally doesn't start at 2 inches at the top. It starts at 1 inch at the top. And normally you put some type of heading with the receiver's name, the page number, and the date at the top. And so we'll see what some of those looks like right now. Like I said, the difference between block, modified, and AMS, very important to know. Block, every part is to the left. We're writing all parts to the left. And what happens is we skip 6 lines if there's no letterhead. All parts are followed by a double space except the date and complimentary close, which have a quadruple space. With a modified block, it's the same as a block letter, except that the date, return address, complimentary close, and signature line all start at the center of the page. So everything is not to the left as with a block letter. Paragraphs can be indented, or they can all be block as well. AMS style letter stands for American Management Style. It's missing a salutation and complimentary close, and the subject follows the inside address or the receiver's address in all caps. All parts followed by a double space except the date, which is quadruple space, and after the receiver's address, we have a triple space. So here's an example of a block letter with a letterhead. This is an example of a letterhead. It gives the name of the company, its address, telephone number, because you normally, when you're writing an address, you normally don't put telephone number and things like that in there. But a letterhead can contain things like the slogan, a logo, the telephone number, email address, etc. Whereas a regular address does not. So this is your letterhead. The date is normally, like it says, right at the 2-inch margin line or 2 inches below your letterhead. And so the date is normally written month, day, comma, and then the year. Then it's 4 spaces or quadruple space below. And then you have your inside address or your receiver's address or the letter address. Here, Mr. Alex Perkler is the one receiving this letter. He works at Homemade Construction. This is the address of Homemade Construction, all of which is correctly underneath his name. Like I said, if it was an attention line, I would have put attention owner and then Homemade Construction instead of the name. Because when we use an attention line, we don't know the name of the individual. After the inside address is the salutation, the greeting. So dear Mr. Perkler, we normally wouldn't put Mr. Alex Perkler or Mr. Alex P. Perkler. We would just put dear Mr. or Mrs. and then the last name. And then we would put double space and get to the body. The body is where we give all of the detail. For neatness, we would double space in between each and after each paragraph, double space. And then we have, this is our complimentary close, sincerely, yours truly. Normally, sincerely in business writing. Then it's quadruple space to leave space for a signature. And this is going to be the name of the individual that wrote this letter. Whether they typed it or not, they would have written this letter and somebody might have typed it on their behalf. But Chuck Foskate wrote the letter. He is the chair, that's his position or title, of Friends and Neighbors Dinner. And so that's his name and title. And then double space below is any enclosure. This is an enclosure notation, which just lets me know that attached to this letter is another document that Mr. Foskate would have sent along. All right. And so this is a perfect format of how a business letter should look with a letterhead. Pay attention to its order because these are the orders that it should fall into. This is a very terrible example of modified block letter, but ultimately what I wanted you to see is it's going to have the same concepts, the date, the inside address, the salutation, complimentary clause, name and title, the signature. They even have an enclosure as well. But what you notice is that everything is not to the left anymore. There's some parts that are here in the middle of the page. And so this isn't a letterhead. This is the address, a return address. So a letterhead or return address can be used interchangeably. But this one here is a return address, and the return address, date, complimentary clause, signature, signature line, they all line up. Everything else is to the left. And so when you're writing a modified block letter, this area here, these should not start where everything else starts. They should be at the center of the page. And then this here is your AMS style letter, which has the information of who this letter is going to. At the very top, we have our triple space, and then this is a subject, simplified style, and then double space, and then this is the body of the letter. And then you have your name and title, and you leave a quadruple space after for a signature as well. But like I said, as you see, you will not have the return, the salutation. There's no dear manager or anything like that. And then there's no sincerely. And that's the only real difference between the three letter styles. Along with letters normally come envelopes. And as you'll see, as we saw previously, with the envelopes, you want to make sure you follow the standard style as well. On the left top corner is the return address or the letterhead of the company that's sending the letter, the stamp, and then in the center is the inside address. And so there's a standard envelope, and then there's an OCR optical character reader envelope that's formatted, but the same information stays on there. So we can have, like I said, the letterhead or return address, the receiver's address, the stamp, mailing notation, which normally goes underneath the stamp, special addressee notation can oftentimes come underneath the return address. Those are things like confidential and personal because they have nothing to do with the post office. So they do not go underneath the stamp like as would a mailing notation, which is a instruction to the post office itself. When we think of the format, we want to make sure we have the recipient's full name, the name of the business that they work for, and the address of that business in proper order. The same thing should be at the top here as well. If this was an OCR format, everything would have been blocked with, that means your return address would be here, your address or receiver's address would be here as well instead of at the center. Everything would be in all caps and there would be no punctuation. If we're talking about states, we would abbreviate state, so FL. If there's a city or town that follows the street address, and then the postal code is on the same line as the city or town. And so these are things that you need to be familiar with in the event you're asked to write an OCR formatted letter. Here at the bottom, you'll find this is called a window envelope. And this particular envelope has a clear plastic that allows an individual to just type the receiver's address on the letter, and it actually just reflects through instead of having to retype it again. These type of envelopes are convenient because they tend to save time, and so they avoid you having to retype the receiver's address again. At the top here is actually a scannable barcode, OCR format, standard barcode that you scan to get information on the actual item that's being sent in the envelope. Next, we're going to talk about memorandums. And so with memorandums, there are two basic types or styles of memorandums. We have your standard and your simplified. Both memorandums have headings, or they have information that can be in the headings. They have a body, they have reference initials if you type the memo on behalf of someone. And then they have some optional letter parts like your carbon or your copy notation that can be a part of a memo as well. For a standard memo, of course, we normally include the word memorandum at the top of the page, and we skip 6 lines or double space after each and between headings. Headings are usually in all caps and indent. I'll show you that shortly. Then for the simplified, we skip 6 lines, triple space after the date. The subject is in all caps, double space, and then the writer name and title is not at the top, but it's actually after the body. And so let's see what it looks like. Here's the difference between a standard memo and a simplified memo. Like I said, with the standard memo, at the very top, the word memorandum is here. And then what happens is you have the heading, which is your to, from, date, and subject. The CC means copy notation or carbon copy, which is an example of one of the optional letter parts. But this is optional, not always in every memo. And so you'll see that to, from, date, and subject are in all caps. And then you'll see that the first letter of each of those categories are lined up appropriately. And so you want to make sure you do that as well. Subject would normally be in all caps. It's just not in all caps here. And then we have the body of the letter. And if there's nothing else to add, that's it for the memo, the standard memo. Now, the simplified memo, what happens here is you start with the date at the top. So over here, we started with memorandum. Simplified memo, we start with the date, and then we put who the memo is actually going to. The subject is here, normally in all caps, and then we have the body of the memo itself, followed by the name and title, if there's a title, of the individual sending the memo. In this instance, they have reference initials, SLD, at the bottom of this memorandum, signifying that somebody else typed this letter for Mr. Ramirez. But as you can see, there's a visual difference between a standard and a simplified memo. One has this particular setup at the top. The other one reminds you a little bit more of a letter. And that's how I like to describe them. But memos are going to be short ways of communicating within the office in written form. We have things like emails. When we look at emails, emails are electronic mails that are sent in business. To send a business email, you should have a business email address. So here's an example. When you send out a business email, oftentimes you're not going to have an @gmail or @hotmail.com. You're going to have the name of the company afterwards. They call that the domain. And so let's say I worked for the Bahamas government. My information would probably be bbrennan@bahamas.gov.bs. That after the @ usually tells you where your company, what company you work for. It gives the receiver of the email an idea of what company you work for, makes your email a little bit more legitimate than sending it from a Gmail or Hotmail. Okay. An email address consists of the name and the domain. This is going to be most times the name of the person or their position, sometimes and then the name of the company is usually after in the domain section. The domain is usually the company's email address and are the words followed by the @sign. So when we look at an example of the email here, it's usually a from, name, from, address, reply to, or email address to, and a subject, and then the body. These are your basic parts of an email: to, from, subject, and body. The to and the from should be an email address as well. And as you notice, this is going to the same person, but you see their email address is not a Hotmail. It's at marquito.com. So most likely their company is Marquito. And so I'm going to get that by looking at the email address. What happens next is you should have a salutation, a greeting for emails, followed by the body. And normally the signature, the name and the title and the complimentary clause should also follow. So an email is literally just a mini letter, except that the address is not a physical address. It's actually an email address. And so that's really the only difference between the two. In an email, optional parts you can attach things. So you can have an attachment, as well as you can have a copy, a carbon copy or CC, copy notation, or BCC, blind copy notation. All of those kind of fit their optional parts in the email. Tips for sending emails. You want to start with a friendly opening or greeting. After your greeting, include a warm opening statement, and now state why you're writing. And so if there are several things you're talking about, you want to make sure that it's clear and you've written your document very concise. So those 5 C's are coming up again: being complete, clear, concise, courteous, correct. Then after that, after you've given your objectives, write your message, and then do a nice warm up at the end. Finally, you end with a closing statement on the signature line, which includes your contact information. And this helps to show you're an approachable and available individual. And so that information helps you with setting out proper emails. You think of it as a letter, just in electronic form, and you do your best to be as courteous and give off a good perception when you're sending out an email. That's it for business correspondence. I hope you got a lot from this session. We talked a lot, and please, please, please keep in mind those formats for business letters, formats for memos, and emails. If you have to play this over and over and over, go ahead. I won't judge you. It's okay. But that's information you definitely have to get, because oftentimes they do like to ask about parts of business letter, what are optional, what are required parts, the styles of business letters, and sometimes they ask you to prepare a business letter or a business memo, and you need to know how to prepare those. They may ask you to prepare an email as well, and you have to know that you have to remember to put the to and from in on their email addresses, not the names, email addresses, a subject, and complimentary close, salutation, the body as a part of your email. Be familiar with what makes paper high quality, and be familiar with how to give neutral, persuasive, positive, and negative messages. Be familiar with what a form letter is and a boilerplate is, and you should be good to go. So I'm going to end this here. Happy studying. Hi, Brenda here. I just want to take the time to say thank you for choosing this course. Thank you for choosing yourself and for preparing as you should for office procedures BGCSE. Look forward to more from me and Business Teacher Pal, and I look forward to seeing you in other classes. Bye.